So today's guest is Seemant Jauhari. Seemant brings 21 years of experience in healthcare investments, innovation, business consulting, and strategy. Seemant leads HealthXCapital, one of the leading early stage healthcare dedicated VCs in South and Southeast Asia. In his previous assignments, Seemant has had diverse experience across business consulting at Ernst& Young, strategy and transformation at Nokia Solutions, and networks and IT consulting at Tata Consultancy Services, TCS. Seemant is a graduate of the Indian School of Business with an executive education from Barclay Haas and Rikanti Business School in Tel Aviv. He has a bachelor's in engineering from the Birla Institute of Technology, India. Seemant, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Joe. Pleasure to be on this podcast.
Thanks very much for coming. So this podcast, Seemant, is generally about giving our viewers who may be aspiring entrepreneurs or even existing entrepreneurs some idea of the journeys of our guests to how they got where they currently are. And we always find that it's best to start at the beginning part of the career, because quite often that is where some of the seeds are laid or the foundations laid for that drive to go towards entrepreneurialism. So if that's okay, would you mind just outlining what the early part of your career looked like?
Sure. It'll be my pleasure. So, as I recall, when I started my career with Tata Consulting Services, I was an engineer from the Birla Institute of Technology, Mesra, Ranchi, which was in Jharkhand. And in those days, I think we had a fairly common path to go into software, or usually one became a doctor and went the other way. So we did engineering. We got through a software company, TCS, and there used to be a joke: trespassers will be recruited in those days. So the software companies used to come and hire by the dozens. And my first job was into software. I must admit, I realized fairly early on that I was a miserable failure at it.
What made you think that?
The fact that I was thrown in the server room to keep the computers warm and the servers warm showed amply that they didn't trust my software making skills. And I had zero interest in sort of trying to do that. As much as I tried, I didn't really do well. But then what also happened is, in the process, I think our own personalities and our own aspirations lead you in a certain path. And within the software thing, they had another opportunity, which was into software testing and stuff, which was the lower perceived cousin of
Yeah.
software coding. And I think I was creative inherently, so I started developing a lot of test cases, automating those test cases, and sort of crunching the intervals in terms of letting those software patches get released sooner by catching more bugs sooner. So more bugs and faster. That was the underlying part. And so that sort of led to a very interesting sort of growth within where I was in TCS. Although I still knew that this is not what I wanted to do. And I was very keen to get into a B school, and ISB happened after that. So that was the first sort of job experience that I had. A couple of things came out of it, basically. One, I was creative, so I should sort of double down on it. Second, I was a people person, so I was actually sent on site to deal with the client and look at his expectations, project manage, and so on and so forth. So I kind of enjoyed that. And then third, that I need something more creative or more diverse, I would say. Creative was one, diverse was another. So I need a little diversity in what I'm doing, and that sort of came about as an opportunity when I got through ISB. So ISB was a great, as cliched as it sounds,
Mm.
it did change my life because of all of you fantastic people who came there from very different walks of life. And that diversity in ISB, I still remember, opened my mind a lot,
Yeah.
and that fearlessness to tread completely untread paths, uncharted territories, and that your mind, you yourself get opened up to such diversity that it starts seeming that, oh, it might be feasible, for one of us to actually go into those paths. And I
Yeah.
think that was my biggest learning from ISB when we went there. And tell me if I'm going too fast, or
No, no,
how
no.
would you.
You're going perfectly fine.
And so I think ISB, I one of the biggest takeaways was the diversity and being able to think, where do you want to go from here?
Yeah.
In fact, one of my first jobs that I got on ISB was Wipro myself, right?
Mm.
And this was for a product development job. Um, and I think I was out of the placement process, or if I had accepted that, if I recollect. But at the same time, I remember there was Ernst and Young, which had come to campus. Um, I actually pursued them out of campus
Ah,
after
okay.
ISB. While I think, my heart actually said that, look, I need to be in a place where it's going to offer me a lot of diversity in terms of different business sectors, etc., and a lot of people-led engagements. And that sort of led me from the core. My gut said, look, you go in for consulting, you'll get a broader view or diverse sort of experience. And I
Did,
pursued
did
that.
that idea develop while you were at ISB then, or was that your thinking prior to even applying for an MBA?
No, not at all. Not at all. At ISB, I was very confused. To it, even till the end, to be very honest, I was appearing for all sorts of job opportunities which were coming
Hmm.
my way. Of course, consulting is usually very popular, so
Yeah.
I went for that. But I still remember I applied for ITC paper boards, to Airtel's roaming manager position, to I don't know, the software jobs, and there was a whole bunch of them, right?
Mm. Mm.
But even before getting to the placement season, what really gave me a kick was something off track completely when we were doing the ELP projects, if you recall.
Yeah.
The ELP projects was the first whiff of what you could do. And I let my sort of creativity and aspiration loose a little bit. And there was this tiny opportunity where they wanted to do something in sports management.
Hmm.
And here's where I actually got very attracted to the sports arena. In fact, that's still something I am saving up in my belly to go
Mm.
after at some point in my life, in my next gig.
Mm.
Um,
So
there was,
LeBron James, you might become his agent or something like that, maybe.
I don't know. But you know what got me into sports thing is that there was a guy camping in Hyderabad called Billy Rao, who was helping Chandrababu Naidu actually
Okay.
set up what was the IMG Academy's
Yeah.
equivalent in India, called IMG Bharata. And they had actually signed up all these stadiums and all sporting facilities, etc., to scout talent very early on, and then make it a feeder system to develop sports people in
Hmm.
India to the caliber of, let's say, the Pete Sampras and
Yeah.
Agassiz, as they do in IMG. So I loved that idea, and basically that made me get a project for ELP myself, use my networks, and sort of got the first sports consulting project from MRF.
Oh, great.
And yeah, so
Who
they
are
gave
they're
us.
very involved in racing, actually, aren't they? Which my son was involved in for quite a while.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So they gave us a two-prong problem to solve. One was the IMG Pace Foundation, which is where finest pace bowlers came out of for
Hmm.
India, Javagal, Srinath, to others. and there was the MRF sports division, which was the manufacturer for all these cricketing equipment and stuff. So they wanted to make the academy, the Pace Foundation, self-sustainable. That was one. And two, they wanted to expand the sporting division, which was the equipment maker. So that was a fantastic project, and we got a couple of us guys who went cracking on it, how to solve this. It was a classic business expansion, business plan kind of a exercise on one end, and making a foundation into a financially sustainable entity. And then we had to submit these findings and walk them through the MRF guys. So fascinatingly, interesting for me, and it appealed to me over most other usual stuff. So it planted that flag somewhere, a post-it saying that you can go for such widely different sort of things, and it really appealed to me. So when Ernst and Young came and I read a little bit about it, I actually did not qualify for the interview on campus. And when I didn't get it, that night was very changing for me. I realized that why am I feeling so hurt about it, and I closed myself in a room and had a lot of beers that night, and I said, "Oh, why am I feeling bad?" And then it just dawned upon me, look, I think it's because this is probably where I wanted to start off with, saying exposing myself to a lot of different things. That's who I am, perhaps, and that's perhaps where I'll fit. So that was a time when I decided, look, I should actually go for consulting. And I trailed Ernst and Young, stalked them off campus, and sort of flew down to Delhi. Actually, I took my interview in Goa with a whole bunch of 35 ISBNs around beaches. And I
Really?
remember in on one beach, I actually took an interview call with a beer in hand. And I shouldn't be saying this to others, um, but it was fun. And I flew down to Delhi, took this interview with a partner, and he said, "Listen, what do you want to do? Should I, you're from IT, and do you want to go back to IT? And we have a wing which does that. Or we have a very small office in Hyderabad, which does healthcare consulting." So I said, "Healthcare? Oh, I've never done anything in healthcare in life. It's a breath of fresh air." So that attracted me, to be honest. Just the way sports attracted me,
Yeah.
if you see,
So
because
you
the
actually you did not fear doing something different. You were attracted to it.
Yes, I was attracted to it. I'd say
Yeah.
even, and this is a little bit unorganized, but I'll say even in TCS, most people went for the usually popular stuff like Java and
Yeah.
C++ and stuff. I actually picked up something which people probably just balked about. It was called Lotus Notes.
Yeah.
And
I remember.
so I chose Lotus Notes because I think I found where they're going to apply Lotus scripting and Lotus Notes was they were building this e-governance platform for the government, which actually shrunk the decision making from 22 different steps into 6 steps. You just imagine the amount of impact that would have had on governance, and
Of
Chandrababu
course.
Naidu was leading this. So I said, okay, I'm going to go for the impact and join the Lotus scripting group. There were only 2 or 3 of us who raised our hands to do that. The others went the other way. So I think if you look at that, it's been the odd ones, the odd opportunities, the not so sort of explored opportunities which I went for. And impact was one which sort of drove me. And I think just going by the gut. So healthcare came as an opportunity, as a breath of fresh air, and I went into it. And I think it went very well with my personality. That, look, this is not everyone's cup of tea. To go and be thrown into a less known sort of sector, a less known practice in Ernst and Young, and you go take it, and there is chaos along with it, which I loved, actually, to be honest. And that's where I think the seed of just going for unknown stuff,
Yeah.
exploring more came about. And I loved my experience at Ernst and Young, and Ernst and Young was a beautiful experience, I would say. I think just to highlight, there was I think 3 or 4 things that I did. One was healthcare, so I was helping them build the practice itself. So for Ernst and Young, whether it's marketing Ernst& Young for healthcare, getting more clients, etc. So doing the marketing piece of it and business consulting piece of it in healthcare, that was one. But in those days, the beauty of consulting was that you were not so verticalized. So my partner was also the head of business advisory services. And
Mhm.
those days we used to consult on everything and anything before the world got and the clients got wiser and said, listen, I need proper experts to tell me what to do. But we used to consult on anything and everything. And an example of that was I got my first main project at Ernst& Young was Vibrant Gujarat. You remember Mr. Modi being the
Yeah.
chief minister of Gujarat and doing Vibrant Gujarat. We were the first consultants to get appointed to go and do foreign investment promotion for the state of Gujarat. So it was the India's largest state-sponsored marketing program. And Ernst& Young had never done anything like this, nor did any of our consultants, other big four. This was the first time such a product was being launched. And this involved going to Gujarat, getting posted to Ahmedabad, and basically drawing up the blueprints of how this whole Vibrant Gujarat will lift off, how will it get operated, how will it get pursued to finally deliver what was all those big numbers that get talked about, that so many MOUs were signed worth X thousand crores and so on and so forth. So it was a massive foreign investment promotion program, and I was a complete rookie. Who, by the way, there were big expectations at Ernst& Young
Yeah, I can imagine.
that there is this character coming from ISB. So ISB had a big halo, I must say, and that kind of kept me running. Also saying, "Oh my God, these guys are actually expecting a lot." And I'm just a normal guy who has just done some coding, and after ISB, I've
Yeah,
come into this thing, and
pretty
you get
much
slung.
sink or swim.
Oh yeah, sink or swim. It was reputation, it was fear, it was everything playing through my mind.
Did
I
you
still
have any mentorship in that role? Because obviously that can seem pretty daunting. Like as you just said, your experience up until that point is doing on a completely different sort of life cycle, IT testing and so on. And now suddenly you're being tasked with these major uh, policy type issues, or helping implement policy type issues. It's quite a
now
big
that
thing. I mean, do you feel the role of mentors in this is important, or what? Did you not really have that kind of mentorship available?
I think I'll choose the latter. Now that you ask me, there wasn't much mentorship available.
Right.
This was an important project for Ernst& Young because for business advisory services, this was the single largest project by revenue by itself. And this was a rookie team which was deputed there, to be honest. Right from going to Ahmedabad and right from going to Ahmedabad, getting posted there, searching for an office next to the Sabarmati River, and going to the secretariat for the first time, which was I've never done this before, and practically the first day I was literally kicked out of the secretariat, saying, "Hey, I thought you guys are here to do the job for us, and you're asking us the questions." And I was like, "Ouch." So I need to be more prepared, and that's where the question of mentorship came. I think some of our leaders had um, sent us there. Of course, there was supervision, but a large part of it, Joe, was just figuring your way out, and there was less margin for error, given that you were talking to a state government which was impatient, which was hungry to get this done, led by Mr. Modi at that time. Um, I think it was a fascinating experience at the end of it, because we were able to put a team. We were able to identify the priority sectors for the state. And it started with this. It seemed like more like a normal consulting project where we are churning out reports and stuff, and saying, okay, these are the sectors we go after, these are the growth rates, blah, blah, blah. And then came the operational part of it, that how do you actually attract foreign investments now that you've identified the sectors? So then came the fun part, and we said, all right, here's the blueprint of the world. This is the world map. Which are the hotspots for automobiles? So we said Detroit, Stuttgart, and so on and so forth. Which are the hotspots for pharma. We said, okay, US, Germany again, a little bit of India, and so on and so forth. So we just put all these flags on the world map, and we said, all right, we got to get the right people to go to these sector specific zones to attract foreign investments in the identified sectors. And we have to have content which is standardized to go and pitch, which is standardized for Gujarat. But then we have to have a customized content which actually highlights the opportunities which are there, not just at sector level. And I would give uh, complete credit to the government of Gujarat at that point. And Mr. Modi, he actually pointed out saying, why don't, when somebody raises his hand saying, I'm ready to explore this, you should actually be able to give which specific opportunities are available to actually come and invest, and be prepared that who's the Indian JV counterpart and who's the government representative, both, who are ready to partner with you when you actually raise your hand as an investor. So that
So
was like
under the foreign direct investment rules, it was very much a situation of you would invest with a lead Indian partner. Is that right?
Yeah, so that was correct, because most foreign investors coming into India for the first time would not like to come in on their own. Plus, I think our policies also did not allow 100% foreign ownership.
Yeah, at that
So
time.
they required, at that time. So they required an Indian partner. So what the government was doing is pulling out all stops, saying, all right, if you do get interested, then we have all the other things taken care of. And who will come to the table with you for which specific opportunities. And I still remember we made Excel sheets to say, calculate the IRRs and stuff for each project. It was down to that detail. And we were ready with all this, and where we needed to go, with which people came the next part. So we actually got industry captains from different sectors together, charted out the whole itinerary, and then it became almost like I started questioning myself, am I a travel agent of sorts, which is actually, putting all this together, that who goes where and stuff like that. But it wasn't any mom and pop. It was like people from British Petroleum, people
Yeah.
from the infrastructure side. There was, I still remember, I'd gone, one of my best trips was with Mr. Kamal Nanavati, who was the head of Reliance Petrochemicals and Mukesh Ambani's right hand man.
Right.
Actually, Mr. Ambani was supposed to travel on that trip, but he deputed Kamal Nanavati, and we went with him. And I went with the petroleum secretary at that time, um, and we went and camped in New York, Houston. We sat in the boardrooms of companies like Exxon Mobil Oil. Just imagine. I mean,
Yeah.
this was mind-blowing experience. And
Of
this
course.
was here, there was one Mr. Pandey from ONGC who flew down separately, sitting in Exxon Mobil Oil, a $360 billion company's headquarters, and we were discussing the National Exploration Policy 5 at that point. It was just fascinating. And then there was the first time I met a senator who actually patted us, saying, hey, you guys, I know you're Ernst & Young COO, and I didn't know this is happening, that you're attracting foreign investments coming here all the way to US. And, it was just a humbling experience to say, I didn't realize what kind of access I had at that point in time. I think that was the biggest learning. If I look back to my life, and this is something they don't teach us at any B school also, how important, and how to recognize network and keep it cultivated. You know, I never knew. Basically, I used to go to Gautam Adani's office quite often through that Vibrant Gujarat thing. I had no clue how big he would become, of course. And there was Kamal Nanavati, who probably offered one of us a job to take on the Russian operations at that time when Reliance was expanding. I said, well, I'm part of Ernst & Young. It's a blue chip MNC company. Why should I go to Reliance? But today I think, oh my God, the guy was actually offering us an entrepreneurial thing to head off a particular SBU of his in Russia, where he had no presence. Look at what you'd made, a killing. I mean, we've gone the other way, right? We have all gone through corporates, and then we've done our own journeys. But you could have actually gone that ways, but actually what's more conditioned in a lot of us is, oh well, we were conditioned and trained to go for the best job with the best MNC
Absolutely.
corporate, and that's what I looked up to at that point in time. And it was a fascinating experience. So that was the second block: healthcare, foreign investment promotion. And the third piece was a bunch of other stuff. One of I think it was a little bit of technology. So I went deputed to Cable and Wireless as MD, as a secondee from Ernst and Young, and tried to make his plan how to make Cable and Wireless India more attractive as a global sort of destination for other telecoms and stuff like that. And then did a crazy project called putting up an Institute of Creativity in India, which was sponsored by Kapil Sibal from the Congress government. And I was like, Institute of Creativity, why? What does it even mean? And then I realized it was a very fascinating project. They were actually thinking, look at the thought process, all right? Uh, the thought process was to make India a center for creation of intellectual property. That's where so if there were three T's, technology, talent, and the third piece was, I think, tolerance or one of those things. But I remember we had technology, we had talent. What we didn't have is actually IP generated in India. So true innovation, the intellectual property piece. And I got to compare that intellectual property indexes and stuff with US, with Israel, with China, and we were far behind. And so that is why government was actually coming up with saying, all right, this is something we need to bridge, and how do you do that? So it 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 further attracted me to this word innovation, which was a buzzword of that time, but overkilled, abused word. But then I got deeper into it. As in, what is innovation? And it left again that post-it in my head at some point, that it had to be revisited. And today I am there. So those were like some other stuff: government advisory, technology, and stuff. And then there was foreign investment promotion. There was healthcare.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I think that's incredibly interesting because obviously through each of those blocks, um, there were there were primary there was primary experience that you gained in the actual thing that you were doing, but also kind of cascading skills, if you like, around things like stakeholder management, project management, how to manage a dialogue towards a particular end. So extremely interesting. Now, having built up that set of skills and that range of experiences, um, what led you to sort of focus in back on the healthcare sector?
Yeah, good question. Actually, this was a time when I was actually going through a lot of sectors, and it made me question myself. A little bit of my analytical brain took over and said, "Well, you've been meandering and enjoying what you're doing. This breath of fresh airs kept going. Different projects, diversity." So I actually said, let's do a check review. What am I doing and where do I want to go from here? And I figured that, look, I'm a technology guy. I was an engineer. I went into software. Um, Really, I need to verticalize somewhere if I have to, even consult somebody and advise somebody or grow myself as a professional. I should be verticalizing, and that thought sort of pushed me, saying, okay, what? I guess I took a safer bet, which is it wasn't intuitive; it was counterintuitive, and this was mainly by my self-assessment and brain that I took a decision. And it was an opportunistic call, but it was driven by the fact that I should verticalize, and I took a safer bet to verticalize, which was technology, which was and I got a opportunity with Nokia. Nokia Siemens network, it was called at that point. Now it's Nokia Solutions Network. That's the only Nokia that's left now.
Mm.
So this division was on the networking side, right? This is not the telecom marketing entities, the main telecom operator side. This is the networking side: Ericsson, Huawei, Alcatel, Lucent, Nokia, Siemens networks. These were the
Yeah.
four kings at that time. And at that point, Nokia had just married Siemens to take on the mights of Huawei and Ericsson. Ericsson was hitting them, at the market share level, and Huawei was hitting at the profitability level. And these guys were sandwiched in between. So they had just married, and sort of post-merger integrations were happening and all of that. Here is where they decided to shift the headquarters of services, which was a 7.5 billion euro business, the headquarters of that, to be shifted from Munich to Gurgaon. It was a huge decision, right? And here you had, like, 1/3 of that global leadership of the services business coming from Finland and Munich. And you'd see all these Finns and Germans actually make their way into Gurgaon also. Some of the leadership shifted, and a lot of people, coming in and out. So I took this more as an opportunistic bet. And one more thing attracted me is the chaos, that you're building something from a start, like, Nokia and Siemens taking on these two biggies, and there is chaos, and there was an office set up to make sure that how do you do this in the best way possible? How do you transform this organization, make it leaner, make it smarter? How do you change the power circles and power equations in the organization to make it actually deliver much more meaningfully and engage the customer? Very rewarding role, to be honest. I mean, this is what a true blue strategy role, as we say in
Yeah.
in these schools, were. Um, um, and here there was a sadistic pleasure that I had, was that here we were part of the global strategy team. So half my team used to sit in Munich, and half my team was in Gurgaon, and we were a crack team which was formed from different consulting organizations. I think, the wild card in that team, because I had this very varied experience. And then there were people from Oliver Wyman, who was from telecom. There was people from Accenture, who had more enterprise sales, software kind of thing. There was Balu, our own classmate, who also joined from, I think it was, in those days, Satyam. He had come from Satyam. So it was a crack team that joined this thing, and we had a whole thing about trying and making the strategy for Nokia Siemens networks at a global level.
What
Um,
kind of team size were you?
we were about 5 or 6 guys,
Okay.
reporting into a fairly successful young Turk, who used to sit out of UK. I don't know if you know him, Amit Dhingra, who became the
I've
managed
heard the
services.
name, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's been an old hat at telecom, and so Amit, from London Business School, had actually picked us up, and we had been given this task of trying to figure out, how do you change these rules. We used to do some fantastic stuff, like, if we have GNOX and Gurgaon and Noida, and you have these in Beijing and Shanghai, but there's a cost arbitrage that's playing out. Why don't we just cross out these functions and actually just transfer this out here? And it makes so much of a difference for the company, right? So, but we were touching nerves in the company, of course, doing so. We were talking about global service delivery centers, which were essentially, not, we were trying to copy what Cisco had done, what IBM had done, putting up these common shared services centers, from where we will do delivery as a global service delivery kind of teams, rather than having regional teams which have
Yeah.
overlaps. But that also means taking a whole bunch of power out of the leaders out in those regions.
Of course.
So really, whoever heads those GSDCs, would be powerful, and then suddenly the region becomes less powerful. So it was a fascinating project. I think, did it for a couple of years, to be honest. But one thing I realized was that I took that decision with my mind, and not with my heart, and not with my gut. And so far, if you saw all the dots, I'd always jumped in something very intuitively, and what made sense to me in terms of impact, in terms of diversity, and so on. And I realized, look, I'm not connecting with this stuff. I can't figure out the impact of what I'm doing. I'm talking radio products, base stations, and all of that, and ultimately it's getting some convenience and things like that. And again, I was very far from the real sales and all of that. This is how much strategy one would one do. So I figured what I had in Ernst and Young and all was actually so much more exciting. And I could see people in front of me. I could talk about things, how this would impact you. I could see it. And then I decided, look, I still have to verticalize, but this is not it. This is not it. And that's where I come to answer your question, Joe. I took a call. Look, no matter what, I think I loved my healthcare stint at in Ernst and Young in 2005, 2006, and that I was now in Nokia. I was in 2008, and I said, listen, if I have to do something, I do it for the next 10, 15 years. That let me not sort of stretch it beyond that, but minimum 10 years to 15 years I should be able to do one vertical now. And I think it just came by my gut, and I said, I really enjoyed my healthcare thing. I got, I consume information voraciously on healthcare. I haven't done that for telecom as much, or for software, so let me just take a jump and I follow my gut. I started searching for some stuff, both, and I actually asked myself what else. And sports came again into my mind, so I started searching for opportunities, and I interviewed with a couple of sports management companies also, trying out just my luck. But again, that fearlessness was there, that maybe I can get it. And then so happened, Apollo Hospitals happened. So one of my ex-clients in Ernst& Young, I wrote to them and I said, look, I'm in this position in life where I'm a former consultant. Do you have something interesting for me? And that's when one of the, family who runs Apollo, one of the sisters, there are four sisters, one sister actually came back saying, Seemant, look, we are scaling very well as hospitals. We have clinical excellence, but what we don't have is any kind of research or innovation. And would that be of interest to you? And to be honest, Joe, it was a leap of faith. I had no clue what a Indian hospital system looks like from the inside. But what appealed to me is the fact that innovation, that word, and that post-it came alive. From the Creativity Institute project that in Ernst and Young, which I did, and the healthcare parts, which for foreign investment promotion, or the projects that I did. I think those post-its came alive, and I was like, why not? It is the biggest hospital chain in India, and they're expecting me to do something on innovation. They actually didn't tell me anything how to do or what to do. Typically, coming from the corporate sector, especially from a mecca of processes, Nokia, I expected everything to be defined,
Yeah.
and they said, I, we'd love you to figure it out. I was like, yeah, excuse me, figure it out?
What? So
How do
were
I?
you brought in, alone to build this research and innovation team? So you effectively had to define the problem yourselves and what your objective was, build the team, and then aim towards that. You were handling this from scratch, were you?
So how I got into this was I inherited what was the clinical trials team in Apollo, the clinical trials business unit, basically. What they used to do is basically conduct clinical studies for all the drugs in the world. Most of the major sort of pharma manufacturers, before taking out a drug, they go through clinical studies, right? Those clinical studies are outsourced to contract research organizations, CROs, and they further outsourced to hospitals, which is where the studies happen. Give me a second, Joe.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sorry.
That's
My
okay.
dog,
That's
pardon
fine.
me. So I think I inherited that, but with that, I inherited about 150 people spread across 12 locations in India. So that was the beautiful part. And these were all clinical researchers who used to have a network with roughly about 1,000 doctors across 12 different locations within Apollo hospitals in India. And Apollo was like fairly widespread out, right?
Yeah.
So wherever I traveled in these 12 places, I would actually have a team there to, go and talk to. And best part was these researchers had a network with at least 1,000 of the 10,000 Apollo doctors. Now, this was all, clinical validation, clinical studies of drugs which is the most complex end of medicine. These are compounds that you're talking about which work or not, and it's a fairly regimented process. It's got ethics, it's got regulation along with it, and all of that.
Is this
So I was
only
actually
for Indian pharmaceuticals companies' products or global?
no, it's global. So 80% of the clinical studies that we were doing in Apollo, they were all from international clinical studies, which had one leg in India with one sub leg in Apollo. So they actually break up the clinical study and give it to number of hospitals, and then collect data from these number of hospitals. Add it up, make the report, and see the analysis of that data, saying that okay, is this drug working?
Yeah.
Is it safe? What is the dosage, etc., etc. There are various stages of clinical studies and stuff.
And you
So I
could be
actually,
working with Bayer, with Novartis, with
oh yeah,
whoever.
absolutely. So my
Okay.
world became suddenly, I got thrown at the deeper end of the spectrum, not really the typical healthcare services delivery of the hospital. I used to sit in the hospital, but deep end of the spectrum was this part where you're actually talking about clearing medicines which actually go into a patient's stomach. Um, and you have to do this carefully, right? I mean, there is ethics involved, there is regulation involved, and there are people involved. Um, so had to be really careful. And my world became pharma companies, CROs, and hospitals. Oh, by the way, when I first came from Nokia to Apollo, I, I, I was shocked, to say the least, because here was a green painted wall with a tube light, whereas I was coming from a very fancy glass building in Gurgaon, and from mecca of processes to mecca of chaos completely, because this was
Yeah.
all promoter driven. It was a very very different culture shock for me, because I was in Ernst and Young, I was in Nokia, and then I go to Apollo Hospitals. It's very different, right? Just the culture of
Culturally.
the organization. It was a homegrown company with every second person actually been there in the organization for 20 years. It's almost like a semi-government, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
That's how
thought
my
I actually,
experience was like at BT as well, being an public sector company. Many of the people when I joined in the late 90s, a lot of people had been there for 25, 35 years even, man and boy type of thing. So yeah, I understand exactly what you mean.
and so land up in Apollo. We have to define the problem. To come to your answer, you said, did I have to define the problem? Yes, I did. Did I have to create a solution? Yes, I did. And it was all left to me, and hence it was a weird start, because I wasn't sure whether they're serious about this, because they just left it to me. And so I used to belittle my own, sort of opportunity that I had at hand, saying, all right, these guys haven't defined it, so it might not be important for them. But at the same time, I had this beautiful platform that I had. And in year one, I mean, I couldn't do much, but year two, as things would have it, I cannot sit idle, and I need to create something. I'm very creative, and I'm very impatient. So what happened was, there's a bunch of startups that start coming to Apollo, and they come to different people, the CEO, the family, some key doctors. They all have their networks. So some startups would come from Israel, some would come from Singapore, some would come from the Bay Area. And all of these guys would, true to Indian hospitality, we were very good at wining and dining, and we would discuss these things, and we would say bye bye. And the poor startups, they lost out an opportunity to actually navigate through our system. We lost out an opportunity to get great disruptive innovations in our thing. And that's when my first sort of consulting hat came on. And I said, listen, there's an opportunity here, we're losing out. So I went to the family and I said, listen, you wanted me to do something. I'm telling you, the first thing we should do is land all of these innovations that you guys meet from anywhere. Just put one name up there, send it to my desk. All right, I'll be your man to figure out. Now I have the clinical validation platform, and what I'll do is I'll put a small business platform, a platform as in a small business team. All right, so I'll have a clinico-commercial sort of filter, which will be able to assess what is coming to us and whether it fits in our scheme of things in the hospital. Now, from a clinical side and from a business side, will it add value both sides? Because it had to, right? Clinical first, that whether it will be beneficial to someone, the patient or the doctor, and second, whether it will be beneficial commercially to the hospital as well if we bring it in. So this is what we did, and when we started engaging with these startups, we figured, all right, some of these are very interesting. We should actually, and they were looking for an inroad into the Indian market. Now, if you want to launch your product in the Indian market, you would need the clinical study for it. You would need a approval from us. Having done the clinical study, we take it to the regulator and so on and so forth. This I thought was a good consulting kind of an opportunity by itself, and I said, listen, we'll do the validation of your product, because we were doing validation of the very tough end of the spectrum, which are the drugs. So when somebody came with a healthcare software, I said, of course, I can do the same thing. It's the same regimen, it's the same people who do this, it's the same doctors who do this. So we can do this service for you. We can validate your product for you. And it meant a lot, because from one of Asia's largest hospital chains is saying this works. It means a lot, because they can go back to UK or US, wherever they came from, and say,
So
this
it's
is the
been
data
approved. Yeah.
from me. Correct. And they will use it to combine it with their own study in US, which expedites their journey to get a regulatory approval, which actually bumps up their valuations, etc., and helps
So
them
just
raise.
for clarity, Seemant, the types of organization that were coming, typically what was the sort of solution they were providing? Was it a software solution, as you say, or was it a piece of equipment? What was the offering generally from these types of organizations, or was it, across the piece?
All of those.
Yeah.
So that was the beauty of it, and here's where I started enjoying myself, right? Because I had a Israeli company, for example, which came and said, listen, I have something I can put under your mattress, which will look at the respiratory rate, the heart rate, and
Oh, I
your
see. Yeah.
mobility, and do so continuously, such that I can actually predict your sort of fall, detect your fall, or predict if before you have a code blue event and prevent you to get into the ICU.
Yeah.
Something of that sort, to something as a device from the US, where one gentleman had come saying, this was 10 years back, when he came out with a device, handheld device, for self screening of the breast for women for breast cancers,
Yeah.
and using very, very sensitive piezoelectric sensors to find out unusual breast density at which place in your breast. And you can do it yourself instead of actually going to a gynae and getting a clinical breast exam kind of a thing. So it was
Yeah.
as varied as this, all right? And there were software pieces where people had come saying, okay, can we do just your ECG, but I'll tell you what percentage blockage do you have in which vessel of your heart. I can tell you by doing an ECG. And this was a company which came in 2012 from Calgary. And those guys have actually gone ahead, raised about $80 million
I
now.
was going to say,
And
did it work? Because that would be incredibly useful.
so this was the beginning of my journey. I actually signed up with them, and our grand plan was, we will offer an ECG as a public health thing for $1 a person as a preventive health heart screening in India, which nobody has done before. $1 per screen. And we'd be able to get a result which is equal to an angiogram, and say that which vessel of your heart has what percentage blockage, without having to do an angiogram or a CT scan, which is very high cost. And we'd be able to do this for $1. Unfortunately, in the process of doing so, and our data was fantastic, the American company actually pulled out, and they said their CEO died basically, and the new CEO said, I don't want anything to do with India. So
That's a
I
shame.
didn't sue them. Yeah, I didn't sue them. I didn't know you can sue them. This was the beginning of my journey. So I organically learned, Joe. I had an opportunity here, and it got exciting with more startups coming our way. But the first pivot was to actually do services for them to validate their offerings, which allowed them to enter Indian market, and which also allowed them to go for studies outside. The second pivot was around saying, some of these companies say, listen, we can't pay, we're startups. So I couldn't charge them commercially. So I said, okay, why don't I'll take sweat equity in your company. That's something that I learned. So that's where I entered the equity world, the sweat equity part. And then the third piece which I learned was these companies also wanted capital, and they were some of them were coming and asking, "Look, I need market," which Apollo was. I need clinical validation, which I had in Apollo, and the third piece was capital. And the capital piece was the hardest because Apollo is not trained to think
Yeah.
in investing, doing risk capital business in these innovations and stuff like that. It's an old organization, 40-year-old organization where they knew what is cash in, cash out, healthcare delivery services. You come meet doctor, consult, take medicine, go. You know,
Yeah.
um, and here was a different model. And my first such this was 2011. There were four scientists who came from US, and they said, we want to make a biobank. I had no clue what a biobank was, but when they told me that it is a physical repository of your biosamples, but associated clinical data on top is available, and you this will be the repository which will allow you to make dozens of diagnostic tests which can help in personalized medicine. I thought 10 years in future, and I said, fantastic idea. And actually, Apollo was sitting on potloads of data and physical samples, which get collected every time we got ourselves pricked and gave a blood sample. Some of it is actually left. They collect extra and they keep it. According to laws, they keep it for 3 or 5 years, something like that. And in those after those years, then it ceases to be a biosample of a person. Then it becomes like bio waste, and you actually throw it, which is stupid because it has a lot of information associated with it. So these
But
four
you can't continue at that point. Once it becomes bio waste, the data associated with that cannot be linked to the patient, can it?
no, it cannot
Okay.
get linked. But so that's where these four scientists said, we make a biobank which is financially sustainable. We have seen it working in US, in Greenland, and so on and so forth. It's a beautiful thing to make, and we'll become drug hunters. We'll be able to crunch the time to make medicines. We'll be able to make more diagnostic tests. It appealed to me, and basically we were sitting on latent value, and that was my first real you know step towards innovation. And I ran for, they needed money also, so this was capital, this was clinical validation required also, and this was commercial as well, because Apollo was a marketplace. So this is where I fused all three. And it took me a year to get $1 million from Apollo. 1 year of scratching around, making presentations. It was as if I was one of them. And I finally convinced the Apollo CFO and people to give me that $1 million. It was the hardest earned $1 million, I remember. And then I put up this company right in the back of my office. I had labs and stuff, and I gave them labs, I gave them scientists, and I gave them some money, and I said, go, just go with it. I still remember doing Bhumi Pujan and stuff for that office, and it was like living the life of a startup without the economics of it, of course, because I was helping them do so. So it was like an incubated company. Then we made a couple of joint ventures happen. So there was I was doing phase 2, 3, and 4 trials, and the phase 1 was missing, and India wasn't doing phase 1 then. So we thought ahead of time. We said, let's do phase 1 also, and we made a JV with Quintiles, the world's largest CRO at that time. And behold, we had a JV with Quintiles for phase 1, which is very, very regulated. So we got in the best player in the market to come and inside a hospital put up a building. So I got the whole building made, and saw the lifts being put up, and beautiful center, out of the world. Like, they had only 3 such facilities in the world: Kansas, Uppsala, and London, and the fourth one we got made in Hyderabad. So we got on the map. The architecture of this whole thing was, now I had phase 1, 2, 3, 4. I had the biobank preceding that, which was more on the lab. So we were actually building a whole ecosystem, saying from bench to bedside. How do you make this system? And at the end of it, we start putting genetics. There was no G of genetics in Apollo at that time. I actually introduced it when there was no genetics in India itself. Like, genetics was spoken about, buzzwords. Personalized medicine was buzzwords.
Yeah.
What we did was, we basically did. You remember 23andMe in US? 23andMe is a company which did the BRCA test for Angelina Jolie.
No. I am not aware of that.
So there's this thing where you either give your saliva sample or a blood sample, all right, and they can actually tell you what you are more predisposed to genetically.
Okay.
So so
So
that's the
is it a sequencing measurement then? Yeah. Okay.
so the sequencing part happens later, but these are basically statistical studies which
Okay.
allow you to, and there is some sequencing there of your blood, and then they compare it with the statistical models that they have and say, okay, you're more predisposed to a certain disease. So I started off this by rolling out a test by a player called Datar Genetics in India, and I rolled it out across 5 Apollos, saying if you're coming for your master health check, get opt in for a genetic test, and we will actually give you a coffee table book which tells you genetically what are you more predisposed to, and hence you should be careful about X, Y, Z. Very surprising. Like, I had my own done first time, so I gave my own blood for the first sample, and I had my first coffee table book in Apollo, and I went and took it to the chairman, and I showed him, this is what surprises me, because I was genetically predisposed to rheumatoid arthritis, and I actually had one of my siblings afflicted with rheumatoid arthritis. And then I realized, oh my god, look at that, this is fascinating, right? I mean, it's I am genetically, looks like there is a gene which is making us more predisposed, so I need to be careful with whatever needs to be done. So this is becoming smarter about your health if you apply it properly. Of course, there are pitfalls of rolling out such technologies, because a lot of our physicians don't understand and are not trained on genetics, so they don't know where to apply this on clinical information that is coming out of executive health checks.
Yeah, I can imagine there being quite a bit of scope for hypochondria in situations like this. You
Yes.
see a kind of a traffic light listing of conditions that you may or may not be predisposed to, and that could potentially cause problems for some people.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's fraught with a lot of uncertainty, fear, risks involved. Do you even want to have that kind of information? So a lot of people used to ask me, "What are you going to
Yeah.
do with it?" Now that's where it fails. Unless you actually address that part, it fails. But the beauty of it is, look, we put a genetic test out there, and more than that, what we ended up doing after that was even more interesting, Joe. And here's where the Apollo story I'll start sort of culminating before I go to the next one is
Talking of
we
which,
got
sorry, just before that, Seemant, very quickly, are you okay for time still? Because I realise that we're slightly
oh
going
yeah,
over time.
we ran out of time, yeah, so I'm okay
Oh,
for time.
yeah, yeah, okay, fine.
Um, and tell me if I need to go faster also.
No, 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 that's fine. I mean, if we usually the podcasts are about an hour, so we can go up to like an hour and a half. Say that's fine.
Okay. So we ended up going in the deeper end of the spectrum. At that point in time, I met a neurosurgeon who had come from NHS UK, and he had also worked at Sick Kids Canada. He came back only to do research at Apollo, and whatever he had learned, and he were good guys coming to me, right? People, scientists from US, scientists from NHS, um, and he told me about something called liquid biopsies. We take biopsies from tumor samples to test it and say, okay, what cancers. So he told me about, if you can take blood, you can actually profile the molecular level information in the blood, which tells you that what kind of, if someone has cancer and what kind of cancer. I said, wow, that's fascinating. And he said, being a neurosurgeon, he told me the application of it. And he said, imagine that, you do a CT scan and you find something in your brain. So if you have a brain tumor, suspected brain tumor, you'd have to cut the skull, take a physical biopsy of the brain, which has a 5% morbidity or mortality associated with it. And then you basically send it for a test and you wait for it. But look, how crude is this, right? I mean, but if you could actually just take blood from the hand or anywhere in the body and profile it using gene sequencing and stuff, and actually finding out a mutation which correlates to a particular type of cancer, you don't need to slit this head at all or take a biopsy. It's liquid biopsy. So I didn't know about this, but at that time, apparently Joe Biden had started something called Cancer Moonshot in the White House. So it was an initiative called Cancer Moonshot, started by the White House by Joe Biden, because Joe Biden had, at that time, he was part of the Obama government, and he had launched this because he had lost his son to the most aggressive form of brain tumors. So that's where we said, all right, this gentleman neurosurgeon has something that he's got me hooked on to it. This is amazing if you can do it. I said, can you do it? I didn't have much money with me. I ran this business unit, and I also had a foundation. So they'd given me a foundation also to do some deep end of research and stuff as well. So I gave him some money, I gave him some labs, and I gave him my scientist, and did it exactly like the movies where I would just come in for budgets and milestones and stuff like that, and say, "Hey, what's happening? Are you progressing on this?" 1.5 years, Joe, this guy came up with a working prototype of such a diagnostic test. He published it internationally.
Wow.
Got called to San Diego to present in the Society of Neuro-Oncology, which is the mecca of neuro-onco. And that's when the Apollo family took note, saying, okay, now these guys are not playing. It's not fun and games anymore. Like, these guys are doing serious stuff. The chairman actually got 60 of our best oncologists together. We fired off a program called Precision Oncology. This is all when the world is still talking about personalized medicine, precision oncology, and talking about liquid biopsies. By the way, till date, there is no company which has actually made a test for glioblastomas, the most aggressive form of brain tumors and stuff, in liquid biopsies. But we started off something that fired the imagination of even the chairman, Dr. Reddy, and the first family of healthcare in India. I started getting calls from them saying, "Hey, Seemant, we have this Coromandel Fertilizers chairman, and he's a dialysis patient. He's got kidney problems. We can't do biopsy. Can we do your test, the liquid biopsy?" I said, "It's not my test, liquid biopsy. But it caught on, man. I mean, so I think if somebody asked me what did I achieve, I think I had just achieved breaking mindsets, breaking old mindsets, and introducing to new.
So
And
at Apollo, did they, when you were evaluating all these disruptive new technologies that would also obviously help Apollo as well, did you set up a new vehicle, a new organization that would incubate these companies, these startups? And you would did you have an Apollo investment business?
So, good question. So, here's the problem I faced. We had an entity which was doing this. It was called Apollo Research and Innovations. So,
Which
we
was the
were,
thing that you set up, right?
I, I basically inherited the clinical trials piece, and I
Yeah.
built the innovation piece, and then we renamed it Apollo Research and Innovations. This is the glue, accelerator, whatever you may call it, the
Yeah.
catalyst to make all of these things happen. And the capital part was missing, right? It was project by project, entity by entity. We also, I led a deal to make my first $1 million investment into a cancer genetics company at that point. We set up 3 joint ventures, one in umbilical cord blood banking, one in a phase 1 trial unit with quintiles, and there was a third JV that we set up. We incubated this Biobank company. We invested in a genetics company. We started off what was Apollo's first telemedicine platform. So we went digital also, and we were far ahead of our time, actually, to be honest. And the money part, the capital part, was all project by project organically. We didn't have a vehicle. That's where actually my next site went to, and I said, this is way too tough. If it takes a year to get $1 million, or
Yeah.
it's way too tough. I have to have a vehicle to do it. I need to have some. So the first time I went to them, I said, I want an innovation office with 5 crore rupees. They said no. I said, the second time I went to them, I asked for $5 million. They said no. The third time, by now I was speaking to other people, and my first backer was actually from the most unexpected quarters. It was an Israeli gentleman. I owe it to him. And my trips to Israel, actually, I went for like I said, I've done a course, economics of corporate R&D. I found it very intriguing, and I went to Tel Aviv for the first time, and I got exposed to all these Israeli greats, like really the greats, the guy who were in the defense committees, to all of these, how they've made technology, Air Force technology, into a pill cam for healthcare. They've done some wonderful stuff on other innovations. And how much value they derive out of such innovations, which is pure brain power and intellectual property, and then they reinvest all that money to spawn another 3 startups. And I think the third pillar of Israel, they say, is is the M&A or the innovation part of it. It's called the what innovation nation, right? Startup nation, sorry. And that's changed everything. And one gentleman called Israel Markov, who's like Ratan Tata of Israel. He was the global CEO of Teva, the world's largest generics pharma company. He basically, I was a young guy. I cockily told him that none of your Israeli products will sell in India. So he just smiled and he called me to Israel, and I didn't know whether I should go or not. By the way, I did take that trip, and he spent 3 days with me, and he said, "Listen, I like your idea. We need some money for this kind of a thing, and there's something called, there are funds to do this, and I'll back you and stuff like that. So you should be doing this basically." And he called up the Apollo family and said, "This guy's got an interesting idea." That's when Apollo also took note and said, "Okay, there's a big guy calling up, and there seemed to be some smoke out here." Anyways, they were very sort of excited about all the things that we were doing on the ground. So this came the capital part of it, and began my journey. I started talking to people, and then as things happen, yeah, Joe, I was in Singapore talking on a conference here, and one startup who I was helping, a Singaporean startup, he introduced me to Jungle Ventures, which is a big tech VC. They were not so big that time when I met them. This was 2016. I met them for a coffee meeting, 20 minutes, just randomly organized. And we got excited. They wanted to get into healthcare investing, but they didn't have any background. And I wanted to make a fund. I didn't have any background in that. And they said, "Let's make something." It was as random as that. Let's make something. We just shook hands and we got up. 2016, it took me 1 year to convince Apollo, which has never ever invested in any fund in their 40 years. It took me 1 year, but they got convinced, and they were my cornerstone anchor investors. They agreed to park a decent check in my fund. And then Jungle Ventures, basically, which is the other VC fund, they said, "Fine, we'll back you as well. We'll help you raise the rest of the fund." So that's how it came about. And then I went ahead, and for first time funds, it's very rare to get institutional capital. I think what really helped me is my own background and
Yeah.
experience in Apollo, and Apollo's backing itself. And of course, then I was able to get people like Japan Medical Data Corporation, Infocom Japan, which is a healthcare IT company, Enterprise Singapore, which is a government of Singapore arm for ventures and creating startup ecosystems. They backed me, as well as Vadvani Foundation in the US, to a couple of others. So the beauty part was that we were able to. I was never in. I didn't know V and C of VC. I was never interested in financial services, but
Me
my
neither.
my so my passion for healthcare and I think innovation in general led me here in pursuit of saying, all right, now I want to get this capital piece sorted, because I've seen the other two, the clinical validation and this the commercialization piece, but capital is something. So that brought me saying, we should build a platform which has smart connected capital instead of just capital. Capital is abundant, but smart connected capital is not, which means you can bring more value in terms of to healthcare startups and so on and so forth.
So to
And
be clear, Seemant, at this stage, then the beginning of this capital piece and the idea of setting up essentially a venture fund, is this still owned by, you're under the auspices of Apollo at this stage?
no. Apollo is just one of the investors, so
Okay, okay.
they were nice enough to not hog the VC, and they've been a fantastic LP to me. Uh, they haven't done this ever in their life, like so you know
So that was the point when you started after the Israeli interaction. That was when you realized this could be something, and you acquired support for it, and that's when you stepped away from Apollo.
that is correct. And
Okay, okay, fine.
the part where, in fact, some of my partners tell me that it's a hard thing to pull off, convincing your own employer to give you money and then also exit from that employer and take up another opportunity. I didn't see it as a achievement, but I realized later that yes, it was achievement, to be able to get a strategic hospital chain to invest in you. It's not happened. It's not happened even now. To be honest, no hospital has invested in a fund, and a hospital-backed healthcare fund. It was completely absent. And the reason why we put it in Singapore is the reason both India and Southeast Asia, you know, are going through similar conditions right now. And early stage investors in healthcare, there are practically, it was none. Like, they're generalist investors. There is one big healthcare private equity investor, but VC healthcare investing, early stage, nothing at all. So, and there's a reason to it. It's a very tricky space to operate in on its own. It's always good because we are risk averse in Asia, relatively speaking. So people like to spread their bets and go for generic funds. Um, US and China have actually graduated, US, China, and Europe have graduated to appreciate sector specific funds. And I think we are pioneers in that sense, that we made a early stage dedicated healthcare fund in Asia. India and Southeast Asia is where I invest in early stage, and that there began a journey of venture capital.
Mm.
People still say that you hardly come across as a VC, uh, because what still excites me is actually building some of these companies rather
Yeah.
than sort of the VC part of it, investing in returns. Of course, that's an important part, without which these companies won't grow. But I've grown as an investor. But actually, what I still beat for is really creating that impact from these companies, and some of them are really exciting. I mean,
Yeah.
give me one example: Homage, which is one of my best in my portfolio. It's one of the best Asian home care services companies, and they've literally Uberized home care. And this is, with your app, with your technology. If you are in US but you want somebody to take care for your parents, somebody actually who is well equipped and experienced to deliver a specific service that you've asked for, only those people will be chosen, shortlisted, and one person will choose the job, and it gets sent to your home, gets delivered. You'll get to see everything that's being happening with what services are being delivered to your parents, and so on and so forth. So a beautiful company. It's grown to about $30 million of revenue, and in 4 countries now. Similarly, we had done one investment in India, which is Stan Plus, which is actually aggregating emergency response in India. You know how varied that is. You call up, you don't know what's going to turn up. What kind of vehicle, what kind of people, are they skilled enough, what kind of equipment in that. These guys have made, they have a meme. They say Indians get groceries in 8 minutes. We'll get you an ambulance in 12 minutes. So they're actually Uberizing ambulances, so that we don't have to go from point A to point B. He has his own fleet which he operates, and he also operates the fleet of hospitals as well. So if there is a ambulance in the hospital, he'll take it out quickly. He'll handle
Mm.
the call center. He'll kick off the ambulance, manage it completely with their whole technology platform. If not, then he'll send the nearest ambulance from his own fleet to actually fetch the patient to the hospital which you want to go to. So it's a beautiful Uberization of emergency responses. So stuff like that, which is more business model innovation kind of thing, but is making clear impact, and that's really that drives me. Or stuff like which will blow you away completely. I've invested in a company called Breath Diagnostics, which basically analyzes your one breath. You just blow, exhale, and through your breath. This is called breath biopsy loosely. So I talked about
Liquid
liquid
biopsy.
biopsy. There's biopsy, solid biopsy, there's liquid biopsy, and now I'm talking about breath biopsy, loose term to be used, but basically you assess the air that I blow and you can know that a person actually has a type of a cancer. And if you can do this principally for one cancer, you can do it for other cancers. So my dream is, at some point, if this company succeeds, and this is backed by Mayo Clinics, by the way, no mom and pop, it's like Mayo Clinic backing this company. Um, if this comes through, imagine you're going for an executive health check and you just blow one breath of air, and they'll be able to actually find out whether you actually have cancer on a preventative kind of screening technology, rather than
Absolutely
actually
incredible.
finding it when you actually have cancer. why do that, right? So these are things that we are investing in, and it drives me to sort of go about it. I love what I do now. I found my calling, I guess. And I think what I want to do is a bigger fund now. That's what I'm in the process of doing, a bigger fund. And I think do in healthcare, and the next gig is going to be in climate. So climate and healthcare, those are the two things that I plan to do now.
That's absolutely amazing. And this is actually technically your first entrepreneurial venture, right? But it seems from your career as being employed that quite a lot of those roles were quite entrepreneurial anyway. So you were sort of prepared very well by the kind of briefs that you were given. You were starting things usually, or massively developing things from consulting all the way through to your stint with Apollo. So by the time you came to to starting your own fund, you were not green anymore. You had been there and done it, really, hasn't it?
Very well said, Joe. I think I feel exactly the same. I think all those roles were great opportunities for me to train as an entrepreneur. I still remember my last role when I began in Apollo, it was a foundation. And when they asked me to grow it, and I had to struggle to pay off salaries at some point in time. Eventually I had the backing of Apollo, but I had to struggle. Like, I was very worried, like, if I don't get in enough business, how do I pay my folks, the 150 people that I was working with, and how do I give them increments? How do I defend? So I went through those fires, and it prepared me very well. But at the same time, I enjoyed also my journey. And you're so right. I think it prepared me for this. Here also, I think I had never done fundraising and stuff, which was a very painful process, to be honest.
Mm.
Going and pitching a story, not having a product by itself, but it's a story, right? I mean, it's a concept that building a fund. You will invest in XYZ, and you will probably be able to get return some benefits to the LPs. I've never done this before, but it was a fun ride so far. Like I said, I really love what I do now.
Yeah, and it shows. I mean, your interest in the technology and the impact that that technology can have is really great to hear. Um, a bit more of a philosophical question. Um, there are not many, but there are socialized healthcare systems around the world. For instance, in the UK with the NHS. What do you feel are the kind of ethics of private capital in building healthcare systems? Uh,
Ethics of
yeah, in the sense of um, the interests of public healthcare aligned with the incentive of private capital.
I mean, look, we clearly need more public health at a uniform standard available to people. But we've also seen, look, completely going the current models of public healthcare has only not worked really. If you see, it worked and it didn't work. It, even in NHS, if you take
Yeah,
it, NHS was a beautiful system. But as you load it more and more to a more of a public health system, offering more to their consumers, it went bankrupt, right? On the other hand, you take a completely capitalistic system like the US, that's also not the way to go. We also learned that that's probably the worst system as well, because for every little thing, a cost adds up, and at the end of it, it has become unaffordable in the US. So even though they talk about a lot of insurance for the US consumers, you should actually double click and see the insurance only covers very little
yeah.
for vast swathes of populations in the US as well. So I think there is and in India, of course, it's been like, completely out of pocket to some insurance coming in now. Indonesia getting in some insurance now. So the Ayushman Bharat is a great initiative that is there. But I think there is a robust, there has to be some balance. I don't think infrastructure or resource wide we will ever be able to bridge the gap which is currently there in terms of providing adequate amount of healthcare which is there. it's not possible right now, and that is why a technology intervention is happening right now with telemedicine and all of these aspects of disruption coming in. um, at some point in time, there'll be a good balance between private and public health, which has to be there. Private actually brings in a lot of um, um, uh, private actually brings in a lot of quality in places where public health systems are struggling. Exactly a case in point like India. And public is actually leading the way in places like UK, but then they need to stay competitive and sustainable, and that's also a issue. I mean, so again, I think both have to survive. I don't know if
Yeah.
it answers your question,
No,
but
it does. It's just that you gave good examples there of uh, the extremes of both ends, and there's problems in both. So the hybrid type model is probably uh, the one that will be most workable, and particularly with some of these kind of innovations that you mentioned. Um, the private capital is what will probably drive those, which is what organizations like yours are doing.
yep, I guess so. I hope to sort of be that hybrid, trying to create something with private and public. That would be amazing, to create something like that. And one of the models that I really like is Kaiser Permanente in US. It's inclusive, it's pervasive, and so they build in insurance, they build in accessibility, they build in affordability, all of it together. And no matter where you walk across in the Kaiser system across US, you get almost the patient wherever you go, so there's interoperability. You have the data of that patient, you have standardized protocols, so you won't like go from one hospital in one country to another and get a differential protocol. The protocols will be same. So, and that's the assurance a patient needs, to be
Yes.
honest. And if you just take out the Kaiser word, this is the real system that we should actually have in a country where it is uh, it is competitive, yet it is standardized, and it is covered by insurance, and it is interoperable. No matter where you go, it should not differentiate. One last word I'll leave here is value based care is a big sort of solution that has come in over time, and it has to find its way into our settings, especially in the developing world, also, where money is actually given to doctors when value is actually value is been delivered, rather than money has been given because the transaction has been done. So it's not on if you've done a surgery, that the transaction gets done and the money gets paid. It's actually if value has been delivered and a good outcome has come, then
Yep.
the money transaction should happen. And I think US has led that way out there in that, so that incentivizations etc should be aligned in that sense, where if value is delivered, you should incentivize these people, and that incentive should be all pervasive to the team and the doctor and team and the hospital, all of those. And that sort of keeps them in check as well, to get the ethics part of it in place, which you touched upon to begin your question with. So I think value based care has to find its way, and a hybrid between public and private has to be there. Um, yeah, that's probably it.
Fantastic. Well, I think there has been quite a lot of coverage in this because throughout your career history, you obviously learned different skills along the way. You kind of built up your entrepreneurial chops while you were still employed, which is probably the best way to do it, actually. So that
Fine.
when you finally were running your own thing, so as to say, you were ready. And your career has crossed consulting, technology, and now into the finance sector with investing. It's very inspirational to know that people can cross these domains and be successful in all of them. So I think people will learn a lot from that. So thank you very much, Seemant Jauhari. Where can people find out about you? I guess you're on LinkedIn and so on with HealthXCapital, right?
That's right. No, so LinkedIn is there, my profile's there, so one can find out or reach out to me anytime. Yeah. And I'm thanks for this opportunity, Joe. It was fantastic talking to you after 17 years.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and I learned from this conversation as well, because some of the questions were, I had to probe some of the things in the past, and then answer them. I think they were very fascinating way that you articulated some of those questions. So thank you very much. Pleasure to
Th-
be here.
Thank you very much, Seemant. Thanks very much. Bye bye.
All right, Joe. Stay in touch. Bye bye.